This picture is called the Hymn of Love, Hope, and Forgiveness. It is considered to be the epilogue of the great artist's development and his spiritual testament. The world art knows few works that are equal to Rembrandt van Rijn's painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son, in simplicity and intensity. The great Flemish artist, Rembrandt, painted the picture The Return of the Prodigal Son in the twilight of his long life. After the death of his beloved wife, Saskia, the fortune seemed to turn its back to Rembrandt, and misfortunes befell the painter in an endless stream. His finances fell into decay. The customers stopped buying his pictures. His property came under the hammer. Rembrandt, who grew old and was betrayed by his apprentices, wrote his last monumental canvas to leave his confession and insight for future generations. Time and again, the biblical parable about the return of the prodigal son attracted Rembrandt's attention. This is a story about a disrespectful son who left his father's house, and after long wanderings, privations, and hardships, returned to his native home to ask for forgiveness. In 1636, Rembrandt turned to the story of the prodigal son for the first time. He created numerous sketches, each time reconsidering the meeting of the father and the son. In his early versions, the son, hoping for forgiveness, expresses vividly the repentance of his sins. Later on, the painter depicted a chance meeting of the father and the son. Only 30 years after the beginning of his work at the biblical parable, in the middle of the 1660s, the artist painted a monumental canvas. The plot and the composition of The Return of the Prodigal Son are far from the established tradition of depicting this biblical plot. The action of the picture takes place on a small ground before a house. A kneeling, ragged beggar with his bald head of a convict hides his face on his old father's chest. The old man is unable to embrace his son. He just touches him cautiously and doesn't dare to believe that he returned after long years of agonizing separation. The meeting of the father and the son happens at the joint of two spaces. In the back of the picture, one can discern the contours of the father's house. The boundless expanses of the roads the son walked all over are meant before it. Probably the father and the son had just taken the step to each other. The unintentional witnesses of the scene froze, shaken by its greatness. No movement, no gesture breaks the ringing silence, and the time that slowed, almost stopped, can be felt physically. Traditionally, when painters depict the biblical plot about the prodigal son, they show a joyous meeting that ends in a feast. But we don't see any joy in Rembrandt's picture, The Return of the Prodigal Son. There are no smiles, no shining eyes, even no happy tears. Rembrandt neglected this tradition and created a tragic canvas. Like many other masters of the Flemish school of painting, Rembrandt was a master of work with light and shade. The central characters are placed in a ray of light practically in all his pictures. But the source of light can't be seen. The characters seem to be shining themselves. Only in one of Rembrandt's pictures, The Holy Family, it is seen that the light goes through the window. Looking at the canvas, The Return of the Prodigal Son, one has a feeling that the father's brow and hands are shining, and the kneeling prodigal son is flooded with this reflected light. The face of the man with a beard is illuminated well. Probably using the light, Rembrandt wanted to emphasize that this is another hero of the parable, the elder son. He is not just a witness, he is a participant in what is going on. The artist uses a scanty palette, creating the indivisible merging tone of the canvas, in which a special emotional accent is the scarlet clothes of the father, the man who is endowed with power and holiness. The scarlet color of his cloak symbolizes hope, love, suffering, and forgiveness. Painting the picture The Return of the Prodigal Son, the artist used not only a brush, but also a palette knife and the handle of a brush. He created some details with his fingers. In this way, for example, the prodigal son's left heel was written. The theme of a temptation and wanderings of a human heart was a variant of Rembrandt's main subject, a tragic way of a man who is getting to know the world and himself. His prodigal son is not just a mythical evangelic hero. This is a man, regardless of time and an epoch, any man who went through misfortunes and humiliation. Rembrandt looks upon himself as the prodigal son. His nearest and dearest died, and his former admirers laughed at him. The lonely and indigent artist who went through fame and oblivion comes to the Lord to ask for forgiveness. Rembrandt puts all his life experience into this painting. He forgives his offenders and doesn't grumble at his destiny. The canvas The Return of the Prodigal Son became Rembrandt van Rijn's confession and the spiritual testament of the great artist.